Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, podcast helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, co-founder and chief academic officer here at Newsela, and I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk about AI in education is to work with it openly. So last episode, we looked at research into the effect of teacher use of AI for instructional planning on student engagement and academic performance. And today, I want to talk about the impact of this use on teachers themselves. To do this, I want to consider teachers as learners. I want to spend a little time profiling the ways that teachers use AI to prepare to teach, the implications of this use for their development as teachers, and I want to discuss what impact this has on their students. So this is timely, I think, because of the latest news of Anthropic's bid for teacher attention with the release of Claude for Teachers and the promotion of AI as part of the lesson planning process. With this release, Anthropic joins OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and others in the race to win teacher love and adoption. Most of the discussion to date about teacher use of AI has been about increasing teacher productivity. That makes sense because AI in many fields is arriving as a productivity engine, writing code for engineers, for example. But learning isn't fundamentally a process that is built around productivity. What the field hasn't really defined yet are the aspects of teaching that are acceptable to automate via AI and those that must be preserved as human work. There does seem to be a reasonable opportunity to optimize the work of data analysis, for example. If I give my students an exit ticket and I want to quickly know the results and perhaps 2 to 3 suggested next steps, asking AI to do that analysis for me seems like acceptable territory. But in today's episode, we're going to talk about planning lessons as a specific form of AI use by teachers. We'll say this is distinct from data analysis and next steps, and distinct from content generation, which is a topic I've written about separately on the Newsela blog. So to be clear, this episode is not about how teachers design AI use for their students. It's about how teachers use AI when they want to do their own work, lesson planning, the daily craft of teaching. And the argument I want to make is simple. The right way to think about the role AI should play in supporting a teacher's planning process is to think about planning as a learning process for them. And as such, it should follow the same principles that we've seen the research point to in guiding how students should use AI in their own learning. This episode is about teacher as student of learning, and where should AI fit into this. So when a student sits down with an assignment, we have opinions about how AI should fit in. We say, think first, don't outsource the hard part, revise what the tool gives you, push back on it. At the end of the day, you got to own the result. Those opinions are informed by research. Now, when a teacher plans a lesson, they're the ones completing an assignment. Planning a lesson is not clerical work, and as a result, I think we have to be cautious when we talk about the promise of optimizing lesson planning. It's where the teacher anticipates what their students will misunderstand, where they decide what to teach first and what to save, where they make judgment calls that only someone who knows these kids can make. This is what is known in the field as pedagogical content knowledge, an invaluable skill in the development of teaching. But perhaps just as importantly, the development of increasingly specified and sophisticated pedagogical content knowledge is a very important part of how a teacher gets better at teaching. It's a fundamental aspect of their learning process. So the question, I think, isn't whether AI belongs in a teacher's planning. It's whether they're using it in a way that is going to help develop their expertise or potentially erode it. And everything the learning science says about students learning through struggle, through revision, through reflection, applies to teachers when they plan. It's the same principles, but the learner is different. There's also a second reason this matters, which I'll come back to at the end, and that's that students can tell the difference between a lesson their teacher thought through and one a tool produced. A teacher's habits show up in the classroom. So let's start here. Before a teacher asks AI to generate anything, there's the question of what they need to think through themselves. This is the same productive struggle we want for students, not coincidentally. It comes from research by Manu Kapoor at ETH Zurich, who has studied what he calls productive failure for more than 15 years. His core finding is that when learners wrestle with a problem before they get help, they end up understanding it more deeply than learners who were helped first. The struggle activates what a learner already knows, exposes exactly where their understanding is thin, and prepares them to make use of what comes next. That mechanism doesn't stop applying because the learner's a teacher. When a teacher plans a lesson from first principles, they're doing real cognitive work. They're asking, what is the actual point of this lesson? What is the transferable knowledge or skill? What do I know about how my students think about this topic? Where are they going to get stuck and why? That wrestling is where teacher expertise gets built. If AI hands a teacher a finished plan before they've done any of it, the teacher is skipping the preparation. The expertise is not going to develop. So teachers should do the hard part first. Before they open a tool, they should spend a few minutes with the questions only they can answer. They should sketch the arc of the lesson, name the misconceptions they might expect, write down what they actually want students to know and be able to do. It doesn't have to be polished. They just have to have generated something they can defend. Then they can bring in AI to pressure test what they came up with, to offer an example they hadn't considered, to challenge their sequence. In that context, it's a tool for sharpening a teacher's thinking. Going to AI first, with nothing of their own on the page, is a tool doing the thinking. Those produce very different teachers over time. So now they've asked for AI feedback. What should the thoughtful teacher do next? The same as they would instruct their students. Revise and reflect on what AI gives them. Don't use it as is. There's research on this pattern in teaching specifically. When teachers treat AI-generated material as a first draft and revise it to fit their students and their intentions, the material works. When teachers accept AI output unchanged, students disengage. They can feel the detachment. But revision isn't about correcting the machine. Revision is where the teacher expresses their judgment. It's the cognitive work that makes the lesson theirs and makes them a sharper teacher. So concretely, here's what it might look like. A teacher asks AI to draft a lesson, say, analyzing an argument in a nonfiction text. It gives them something reasonable, generic examples, a clean structure, set of questions. Now's the time for the teacher to get to work. They reorder the questions because they know this group needs to warm up before they'll take a risk. They add a question that surfaces a specific misconception they've watched 3 years of students trip over. They cut the part that assumes background their students don't have yet. By the time the teacher's finished, they've thought through the content, anticipated how their students would move through it, and made deliberate choices grounded in what they know about them. The AI didn't and cannot do that. That's the teacher's work. The caution here is that real revision takes time. Done well, it might take about as long as building the lesson from scratch. I think we've all heard stories of content creators who reflect on the fact that at the end of the day, they might as well have just done the work themselves for all the time they spent revising it once they got the AI product. But when teachers use AI in their planning, they need to budget the revision time, or they're going to deliberately limit AI to the parts of the work where their voice matters less. But either way, they have to decide upfront where the tool is allowed to go, and that is in itself an act of judgment. So the piece that matters just as much is that when AI suggests changes or alternatives, teachers reflect on them. They don't just accept them. When AI comes back with suggestions like reorder this or add a warm-up, the suggestions will look plausible. AI is very good at this. The teacher might nod and fold them in. And in that moment of nodding, when they stop deliberating and they adopt the output as their own, there's great risk. Researchers at Wharton have a name for that point where a person stops deliberating and accepts the tool's output, and that's cognitive surrender. The alternative is something called metacognitive reflection, and there's evidence it changes learning outcomes. Study out of East China Normal University compared feedback that prompted reflection on one's own reasoning against feedback that mostly reassured and encouraged. The reflective kind produced better transfer, the ability to apply learning to a new situation, which is the harder and more meaningful outcome, and transfer is something that teachers are constantly being asked to do. So the teacher move here is that when AI gives you feedback, you run it through the same structure you'd want a student to use with feedback on their writing, for example. So as we've talked about on this show, an example of this is a note catcher with different columns, a column that says, what does the AI say? Another that says, this is what I agree with. Another that says, this is what I don't agree with. And another that says, this is what I'm going to do next. It's a way of structuring and giving a moment of pause to the process of receiving that feedback. Teachers can use this same approach. What is it actually suggesting? And why might it be saying that? What do I agree with, given what I know about my class? And what's missing? The critical judgment on what to make of the feedback and what to do next is the difference between a teacher use of AI that continues to aid in their development and one that's going to hinder it. So coming back to the core idea, the way a teacher practices can easily become the pedagogy that their students experience. When teachers use AI passively in their own work, generate, accept, and move on, they're going to find it very hard to ask their students to do anything different because they'll be teaching one thing and modeling another. Students are going to read that modeling. This thinking that a teacher does or doesn't do when they plan a lesson shapes what they expect from students and what they're able to recognize when students are doing it. But the reverse is also the opportunity. When teachers think before they turn to the tool, when they revise a draft into something that's genuinely theirs, when they reflect on the AI's suggestions instead of just adopting them cold, they're not only building their own expertise, they're practicing in their own work the exact habits that they want to become their students. A teacher's habits become the student's habits. Let me just add parenthetically that what I'm describing here is the same process that I've learned to develop in my own use of AI in the development of these episodes. I take the first pass in my own voice, very often using a speech-to-text tool called WhisperFlow, and then I argue back and forth with the AI over its guidance on how best to compose an episode based on the source documents and my proposed take. I'd like to think this is helping support my learning how to become more insightful over time, but if you've been listening, I'll let you be the judge. So, in closing, here's an exercise for you. Next time you're planning a lesson, notice what it feels like to struggle with it before you reach for help. That feeling is the thing you're trying to give your students. And it's a lot easier to design for it once you've done it yourself. Before we go, a heads up that in our next episode, we're going to zoom in on a subset of the teaching population, teachers new to the profession, and we're going to reflect on the implications of this process for them. As always, thanks for listening to AI in the Classroom Daily. Please share what you're trying, wherever you're listening. I read everything, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.